Today we are going to do a head-on comparison between the two great towns, both of which are located west of Toronto. We are looking at the town of Kitchener versus Brantford. Which town is a better place to live? That's one of the common questions I do get asked by many of my first-time homebuyers, especially the ones who are moving from outside of the Greater Toronto area further west. So that's what this video is about. We are gonna dive deeper into some of the key elements that does make any town a great place to live, and we'll see how Kitchener and Brantford, both these towns, fare against some of those key elements, and that will help us decide which might be a better place to call home. So stay tuned as you get right into it. If this is your first time to this channel, be sure to subscribe to this channel and tap on that bell for notifications so you're the first one to get notified when a new video like this comes out. My name is Dharmik Dixit. I'm a local real estate agent serving Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, and surrounding areas. I help many families with their move in and around Kitchener, Ontario, and I absolutely love it. So whether you're thinking of moving in 9 days or 9 months, be sure to reach out. You can give me a call, shoot me a text, you can send me an email, or you can even schedule a Zoom call. All the info you'll find right below in the description. I'll be more than happy to help you and your family with your move in and around the Kitchener-Waterloo area. So just be mindful that whenever I'm referencing the town of Kitchener in this video, basically I'm referencing the Waterloo region as a whole and not just the town of Kitchener, because that would be a more relevant comparison. Part of the reason being, whenever a client reaches out to me to move to Kitchener, hardly anyone tells me I only want to move to Kitchener. It's usually we are okay to move to Kitchener, Waterloo, or Cambridge. So that's why we will keep it a fair comparison and more so practical comparison, because you could still live in Cambridge and access some great amenities across the Waterloo region. So just be mindful of that, but let's dive right in. Now, let's talk about the location. Both of these towns of Kitchener and Brantford have about the same proximity when it comes to commuting to the major urban center, such as Toronto. You're looking about an hour 20 minutes each way from either of these towns to get you to the Toronto downtown. Now, same is the case for suburban towns around Toronto, such as Mississauga, for example. You're still looking at about an hour commute each way from either Kitchener or Brantford. So the proximity is not better for one or another. However, being part of the Waterloo region, I do feel like Kitchener has an edge here. And I'm not saying it because I live in Kitchener, but I do actually mean it because, as we talk about some of the things like employment, public transport, things like that, you will see what I mean. But Kitchener is more strategically located if you were to talk about overall work economy and the diversity of work options versus Brantford in comparison as a location. Now, one thing also worth noting is that both of these towns are pretty much landlocked. So you don't have direct access to a major water body in your immediate proximity, whether you live in Kitchener or Brantford. So just keep that in mind. If you are a fan of being around water, well, none of these towns will give you that. So just to be mindful of that. But when it comes to location, I would say I would rather give this point out to Kitchener over Brantford. Now let's talk about the real estate price points for both these towns. Now, if I were to talk about the numbers by itself, as per the Brantford Real Estate Board, an average price point for a median price of a single detached home in Q1 of 2024 was just around $655,000, whereby an average price of a townhome for the same quarter was around $615,000. Now, if I were to compare that with Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, basically the Waterloo region, according to the Regional Real Estate Board, an average price for a detached home sold in Q1 of 2024 was well over $850,000, whereby an average price of a townhome sold for the same quarter was well over $650,000. Now, obviously, these are the median prices. They don't really truly reflect the price point difference. What I can tell you, having bought and sold homes in both Kitchener and Brantford, I can tell you there is about at least $100,000 difference if you were to compare apple to apple when it comes to the real estate price points, whether it's the same basically similar neighborhood, identical home between the two towns. You're definitely looking at about at least $100,000 gap between both these towns. What does it mean for you as a first-time homebuyer? Well, it does mean that you will definitely get more value for your money when it comes to real estate in Brantford versus having to live in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, where the demand is slightly higher than that of Brantford. So the point when it comes to real estate prices does go to Brantford. Now let's talk about the cost of living comparison between two of these towns. Now, major part of the cost of living or any household budget is going to be the shelter, whether you own or you rent a place. Let's talk about the rental first. Average rent in Brantford for a one-bedroom apartment is around $1,700, whereby a two-bedroom is going to be close to $1,900, and a three-bedroom is going to cost you close to $2,300. Now, this is as per the rent research website called Zumper.com. I'll be sure to include the link below for your reference in case you want to dive further. But if I were to look at the same numbers for Kitchener, for one bedroom, you're looking at close to $1,900. For two bedroom, you're looking at close to $2,300. And for a three bedroom apartment, you're looking at close to $2,700. So as you can see, there is a material difference in the rental prices, and obviously that does go hand in hand with the cost of living. Now, what if you own the place? Well, again, in that comparison, Brantford will still fare better because, as we talked earlier, the cost of home ownership in Brantford for a similar type of house, if you were to compare with Kitchener, well, it's going to be lower. There's a material difference of 100,000 between the real estate price points of both these towns. So obviously, having a home ownership in Brantford will cost you less in mortgage for the same type of house and will result in lower cost of living. Other than that, if I were to talk about like groceries, your day-to-day items, shopping out or dining out, well, it's not going to be that materially different to really make or break your bank. But if you were to look at overall cost of living, well, I can tell you Brantford will be a little bit on the cheaper side. So I gotta give this point out to Brantford. Now let's talk about the employment opportunities between two of these towns. First, we'll talk about Brantford. Your options to find work locally are going to be limited in Brantford, again to the point of the fact that it's not near any major town. The nearest major town is Hamilton, which is going to be still around half an hour at the least of commute each way. So on the other hand, Kitchener, you are part of the Waterloo region, and the work economy is actually diverse and self-sustaining. We don't see a lot of people having to commute all the way to Toronto. Yes, you will find oftentimes people commuting between the Tri-Cities, Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and sometimes to nearby towns such as Guelph. But you will not find a lot of time people having to commute all the way to Toronto. According to a recent survey done by the region of Waterloo, close to 70 to 80% of people who live here in the region actually work locally. So that does tell you about the diverse and self-sustaining work economy, no matter what your occupation is. So the point here when it comes to employment opportunities, if I were to compare your chance of finding work locally after moving in Waterloo region are far more than after moving to Brantford. And that's actually the issue that's coming to surface now, with a lot of employers calling people back to work a few days a week. We are starting to see a lot of people in Brantford are struggling because they had their work in Toronto and suburbs and they moved to Brantford during the COVID era, and now they are being called back to work a few days a week, and they're having a challenging time trying to find work locally, and they have no option but either to commute on a regular basis or try to relocate back closer to the Greater Toronto area. So just keep that in mind. But the point here, when it comes to the employment opportunities, gotta go to Kitchener. Let's talk about the public transportation network of both the cities. Well, if I were to talk about Brantford, the city of Brantford runs Brantford Transit, and basically you are looking at bus network that gets you around the city. Now, if I were to compare Kitchener, well, you have region of Waterloo has the Grand River Transit. Basically, that does connect you Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo, basically the Tri-Cities. And also, we do have a recently announced LRT system, which has been in place for the last few years. So the connectivity overall between the Tri-Cities is far better, and the transit network is more extensive. Also worth noting, the reason I do give this point out to Kitchener is primarily also because of the fact that you do have access to a GO transit network in case you do have to commute back to, let's say, the Greater Toronto area or Toronto itself. It's still an option to do so by the public transit network. But in Brantford, we don't, as of yet at least, we don't have a GO transit network access. You're gonna either go to a major town nearby, you will have to commute to Hamilton to get you to the GO transit network to access that. So for that reason, I gotta give this point out to Kitchener when it comes to public transportation. Now let's talk about access to education for both these towns. It is worth noting both of these towns offer some great access to public schooling system. When it comes to elementary and secondary schools, you have some great options. Obviously, it will depend on the neighborhood, but what I can tell you, whether you live in Kitchener or Brantford, you will be able to avail some great schooling options in either of these towns. When it comes to higher education, That's where Kitchener will have a little bit of an edge here. But let's look at Brantford first. You have access to Conestoga College campus, and there is a Wilfrid Laurier University, which has a campus in Brantford as well, and they are running multiple programs out of it. And of course, you do have McMaster University, although it's not in Brantford. You could argue that you can commute there and back and forth from Brantford to Hamilton, studying in McMaster University. On the other hand, Kitchener, being part of the Waterloo region, we have access to University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University, and Conestoga College, which has one of its biggest campus right here at the border of Cambridge and Kitchener. So overall, obviously in terms of options, Kitchener-Waterloo will give you more options to pursue higher education locally. So I gotta give this point out to Kitchener-Waterloo when it comes to access to education. Now let's take a closer look at the future growth prospect for both of these towns. Well, one thing I can tell you, if you were to look at the past decade or two, you will note that the Waterloo region, or even Kitchener for that matter, has definitely surpassed Brantford when it comes to the growth in the past decade. Now, obviously, past is not truly a reflection of future. So for that matter, I would still bet my money on Kitchener for the fact of a couple of reasons. First, the employment opportunities are better in Kitchener, being part of the Waterloo region. And I don't mean just Kitchener. What I'm trying to say is, living in Kitchener, you are still able to find work close by having to commute to some of these nearby towns, such as Cambridge, Waterloo, or Guelph, versus Brantford. You don't have a lot of those options. Secondly, the employment opportunities are more diverse in nature. So Cambridge, on one hand, we have logistics, transportation, supply chain, manufacturing. And then on the other hand, you have places like Kitchener-Waterloo, which has its own booming IT ecosystem. So you see the work options are also very diverse, and your chance of eventually finding work locally are more in Kitchener versus that of Brantford. Also, this also in turn means that Kitchener-Waterloo as a region has been able to attract more businesses, more investment in the recent past. We even have a booming venture capital scene here in the Waterloo region, which is unheard of for the town of Brantford. Nothing against it, but what I'm trying to say, if I were to bet my money in real estate investment, well, I would say Kitchener-Waterloo will be a better bet than that of Brantford. And that's what we have seen. If you look at last 12 months growth, Brantford has actually lost its value for real estate price points. And that's why I would give my point here to Kitchener when it comes to future growth prospects. Now, when it comes to things to do in terms of entertainment and recreation, I gotta give this point out to Kitchener solely for the fact that Kitchener has far better options and more options in terms of place to hang out, things to do, in comparison to Brantford. Brantford definitely does have a few options, both indoor and outdoor recreation. But overall, if you were to look at the amount of options and the diversity of those options, well, Kitchener definitely has better options. And not just in Kitchener, but as a Waterloo region as a whole, have an edge here when it comes to recreation and entertainment. So I gotta give this point out to Kitchener when it comes to entertainment. Worth noting though, both these towns have virtually non-existent nightlife. So if you are someone moving from, let's say, downtown Toronto and expecting about the same nightlife in either of these towns, well, I can tell you, you will be disappointed. So just keep that in mind. But for overall things to do, place to hang out, Kitchener is the winner here. Finally, let's talk about the quality of life living in Kitchener versus Brantford. I'll share my 2 cents here. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit subjective for each individual and in each family. But living in Kitchener, I feel like it's a good balance between suburban and the urban lifestyle, where you have pretty much all the urban amenities you need on a regular basis in a close proximity. But you can find some great pockets, some quiet neighborhoods that give you that suburban setting and suburban lifestyle that you can enjoy living in Kitchener. In comparison to that, Brantford, on the other hand, I have a close family that lives in Brantford, and we visit them quite often. And what I find is Brantford to be a little bit more suburban and more quiet. If you have visited the Brantford, you will know what I mean. But to each their own here. If you're looking for a rather more quieter pace of life, I would say Brantford will be a better option. If you're looking for a good balance between busy and quiet, well, I can tell you Kitchener will be a better option. So that's for you. But when it comes to this quality of life, I would love to know your thoughts if you live in either of these towns about what you have to say about the quality of life living in either of these towns. And if you were to count the points, Kitchener is a winner here. We got 5 points for Kitchener, 3 points for Brantford, and 1 tie, which is for the quality of life. We'll let people decide what they have to say about it. But overall, I would say I don't see myself living in Brantford after living in Kitchener, especially if you are someone who is moving out from the Greater Toronto area, which is a more urban setting. I feel like Brantford, you might find it too quiet, but hey, to each their own. And yes, at the end of the day, which town is better for you, your individual lifestyle and your family choices should decide that town. Nonetheless, I hope you did get some value. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and tap on the bell for notification so you're the first to learn about the current market in and around Kitchener, Ontario. Once again, whether you're thinking of moving in 9 days or 9 months, be sure to reach out. All the info is right below in the description. I'll be more than happy to help you and your family make a smooth move in and around Kitchener.